In the suburbs, inside a crowded metro, people were glued to the live telecast of the MMA World Championship. The host's booming voice filled the air as he declared that tonight marked the champion's 17th title defense. The atmosphere was electric. Inside the stadium, the crowd erupted with cheers and anticipation. The announcer first introduced the challenger, Patrick, a tall, ripped fighter who threw off his robe and stepped confidently into the arena. Then came the roar for the champion. The announcer's voice echoed, 37 fights, 37 wins, every single one by knockout. The undefeated world champion, Kim Jin-ho. Unlike his bulky rival, Jin-ho carried a lean but sharp frame. He tossed aside his robe and entered the ring, his calm presence radiating intimidation. The referees signaled for the fight to begin, and the two men faced off. From the commentator's booth, discussion began. One voice wondered how the fight would unfold. The other replied that Patrick had speculated in an interview about Jin-ho's possible leg injury. Since the champion had avoided using footwork in recent matches, Patrick, he explained, would likely exploit that weakness. The first commentator added that Jin-ho, now over 40, might finally be dethroned tonight if the injury were real. Both fighters took their stance. Patrick, nervous but determined, locked eyes with Jin-ho. He thought to himself that the champion's presence was overwhelming. But if he could just take that leg, victory would be his. Charging forward, Patrick focused entirely on the supposed weakness. With a grin, he thought how arrogant it was of Jin-ho to step into the ring with such a flaw. He swore he'd destroy that leg forever. As his hand closed in to grab Jin-ho's leg, Patrick felt victory within reach. But in the very next instant, a burst of blood filled the air alongside a flying mouthguard. The commentator's voice cracked with disbelief. Kim Jin-ho's flawless spinning kick had landed. Patrick was sent crashing down, unconscious in a single strike. His nose gushed blood as he lay motionless. The referee immediately announced the result. The commentators shouted that Patrick could not get back up. It was a shocking first-round knockout. Jin-ho stood over his fallen opponent and coldly muttered that this was the reason he never used his legs. Later in the locker room, Jin-ho's coach tried to stop him. He reminded him about the press conference, urging that he couldn't skip it this time, not after such a fight. But Jin-ho, pulling on his hoodie, dismissed him and told him to handle it himself. The coach protested, frustrated, but Jin-ho simply thanked him and said to call when the next match was scheduled. The coach sighed, defeated, and told him to at least take the car, since the weather outside was unbearable. But Jin-ho replied casually that with the heavy traffic, he'd rather run home. The coach's eyes widened in shock as Jin-ho walked out. He shouted after him, reminding him that it was 30 kilometers to his house. But before he could pursue, the media swarmed in, bombarding him with questions about Jin-ho, about the injury rumors, about the match. Exhausted, the coach could only sigh. Meanwhile, Jin-ho was already sprinting through heavy rain. Memories of his career flashed through his mind, his debut knockout, his streak of victories, and the countless headlines that had crowned him a legend. He remembered the words of someone who once told him that until the day he retired, no opponent would ever bring him joy again. Eventually, he arrived at his towering skyscraper home, 34 floors high. After bathing, he sat before his computer, a grin forming. He booted up Last Savior, an infamously difficult game that even hardcore Korean gamers had long abandoned. But for the past 10 years, Jin-ho had played it religiously, seeking challenges that reality no longer offered. In this game, he could still feel the thrill of the chase, the feeling of being a challenger. Facing the screen, he muttered that the final boss, Demon King Izar, wouldn't be defeated today either. His character stood before the monstrous enemy. Outside, thunder and rain raged as Jin-ho fought intensely, his character chipping away at the Demon King's health bar. But soon he realized something was strange. The patterns were too simple, his hits too precise. His character's blade glowed with violent blue energy, forming the image of a ferocious lion as it slashed mercilessly through the Demon King. Jin-ho reflected bitterly. What began as a challenge to win had twisted into fear of victory itself. With dazzling control, he executed the final strike. A message appeared. Congratulations, Demon King Izar was defeated. The game ended. Last Savior. Thank you for playing. Kim Jin-ho had become a champion of two worlds. But instead of elation, frustration consumed him. He hurled his mouse, cracking the monitor, and muttered angrily, Who was left to fight now? Even the thought of challenging a bear crossed his mind. He cursed in despair. Just then, lightning crashed outside his window. A thunderclap shook his room, and in the next instant, a blinding strike hit. Jinho blacked out. Half conscious, he began to hear voices. Someone was calling him. "Hey, 218! He blinked awake, finding himself in the rain, utterly disoriented. He thought to himself, when did he even leave? A boy suddenly grabbed his shoulder, shouting for him to move. He wore a jacket with the number 172. Urgently, he told Jinho they had no time, that they had to escape now. Bewildered, Jinho asked who he was and where this place was. Around them, countless people were running toward a massive gate, rain pouring over all of them. Jinho caught sight of a strange flag above the gate, something vaguely familiar. The boy shook him again, shouting desperately. Did he want to rot here forever? This was their last chance, their final escape from Carrion. Still reeling, Jinho's eyes widened as he realized what he said. Carrion! He couldn't believe it. And as he stood amidst the chaos, the shock in his eyes grew even sharper. The boy grabbed Jinho's collar and shouted that there was no time to dawdle, urging him to move immediately. Still stunned by the scene before him, Jinho wondered if what he was seeing was even possible. A massive crowd of people was running desperately toward the gate, and he found himself lying right in the middle of it. They were prisoners, all of them. Ropes were tied around the massive gate as prisoners pulled in rows, shouting to each other to pull just a little more. Jinho's thoughts raced. No, this sensation was too real. There was no way this was a dream. Could it be that he had somehow entered the game he was playing? As a prisoner, no less? The boy tugged at his arm, trying to drag him faster, but Jinho could only think that everything was a mystery. Still, survival came first. He had to get out of there. Suddenly, Jinho stopped. The boy whipped around, furious, calling him a lunatic for wasting time, but Jinho cut him off. Something about this seemed strange. Looking around at the chaos, the prisoners fighting guards, the frantic attempts to push open the gate, he realized something was off. If this really was Carrion, then it shouldn't be happening this way. It was far too careless. The boy quickly explained that it was because Director Clark wasn't there. Jinho asked who this Director Clark was, and the boy, still dragging him, replied that the director had rushed out earlier, which was why now was their chance. But suddenly Jinho grabbed the boy's collar and began pulling him backward. The boy screamed in frustration, demanding to know what he was doing, but Jinho ignored him, dragging him away from the gate. His instincts as a fighter screamed at him, no matter what, he should not step beyond that door. The boy struggled to break free, shouting at him to let go. Meanwhile, cheers erupted as the prisoners managed to crack open the gate. They screamed in joy that they were free at last. But the moment they rushed through, blood splattered and a severed hand flew into the air. Standing at the gate was none other than Director Clark. A sword gleamed in his hand, and behind him stood countless guards armed with blades. In front of him lay a man on the ground, writhing in pain, his hand freshly severed. With a cruel smile, Director Clark mocked them as pathetic worms. He then roared for the guards to kill them all. The boy, still in Jinho's grip, whispered Clark's name in dread, but Jinho snapped back that it was obvious now. This was a trap. He urged him to shut up and run. What followed was a massacre. Guards stormed through the gate, cutting down prisoners without mercy. Screams filled the air as men and women who had been celebrating their freedom moments ago were slaughtered. The walls and gates were painted red with blood. When it was over, Director Clark ordered the remaining prisoners rounded up. The guards obeyed instantly, forcing them into lines. Before them lay the corpses of those who had attempted to escape, hacked and butchered. The boy gagged at the grotesque sight, unable to hold back his disgust, and vomited. One guard noticed him, sneered, and reminded him he had been told not to move. Grabbing the boy by the hair, the guard kicked him hard in the stomach. He barked to everyone that anyone who moved from now on would be cut down on the spot. Watching this, Jinho thought grimly about how ruthless they were, even towards children. At this rate, another massacre could break out any moment, and if it did, he might have no choice but to fight. Just then, Director Clark, towering and intimidating, walked right up to Jinho. He mocked him, suggesting that maybe he had survived out of cowardice rather than luck. Addressing all the prisoners, Clark sneered that majors were nothing but cowards, and calling them rivals was an insult. Leaning in close, he glared at Jinho and said that he would regret surviving today, Arahan. As Clark walked away, he added that he would be looking forward to it. Jinho glanced down at a puddle on the ground, his reflection staring back at him. Did he just say Arahan? His eyes widened in shock. Days later, Jinho found himself at the labor camp, where life had only one routine: stacking stone towers. A meaningless task designed to crush the prisoners physically and mentally. Drenched in sweat, Jinho panted heavily, realizing how fragile this body was. Just lifting a single stone left him breathless. Judging from his appearance, he was about 15. And one more thing, this body belonged to a mage. Yet when he had tried casting magic in secret at night, he failed. The Arahan family, known as one of the greatest mage lineages, was famous for their crimson eyes. For an Arahan to be incapable of magic, that was unsettling. Jinho wondered if that was why this body had been discarded in prison. Given what he knew of the Arahan family, it wouldn't surprise him. A guard shouted at him to move the stone tower to the other side, sitting lazily on a chair with a stick in hand. He demanded Jinho quit dawdling. Jinho, however, simply focused, wondering when this endless task would ever finish. In front of him, a glowing screen hovered. It read, "Synchronization in progress. Due to excessive data, synchronization is delayed. Progress 78%. Later, prisoners gathered for a meal. Each received a tiny piece of bread and bland soup." Looking down at the food, Jinho sighed. Maintaining his exercise routine was hard with rations like these. A yellow-haired boy approached him, calling him by his number, 218. He asked if Jinho wasn't eating his bread again. Without hesitation, Jinho handed his bread over, telling him to take it. The boy smiled and thanked him. Jinho thought to himself that while the other prisoners avoided him, this one was peculiar. The Arahan family's crimson eyes were feared as cursed, said to bring death to anyone who looked into them. Perhaps that was why everyone kept their distance. Yet this boy still stayed close. Watching him munch the bread, Jinho wondered why someone so young was locked away in Carian prison. The boy then warned him to be careful. Jinho asked what he meant, and the boy explained that because of his efforts, the workload had increased. Other prisoners weren't happy about it. Maybe he should take it easy. Jinho realized that explained the murderous stares he'd been getting lately. The boy nervously added that he should especially watch out for number 589, the leader of the prisoners. Once a notorious fighter in the arena, he was rumored to be in prison for murder. Jinho asked if that didn't mean being seen with him would put the boy in danger as well, but the boy only smiled, saying they'd known each other a while, and he couldn't just ignore him. Jinho stood up suddenly. Looking at the boy, he told him to move aside. The boy, confused, asked what he meant. At that moment, footsteps echoed closer. Jinho glanced to the side, confirming that the situation the boy feared was about to happen. The boy's face fell in dread. A group of men appeared, led by number 589. The gang leader shouted angrily, accusing Jinho of being the reason their workload had increased. Jinho coolly replied that he was only using it as light exercise. But before he could finish, a massive fist came crashing toward him. Jinho barely dodged in time, the ground cracking under the impact. Dust and smoke rose. The yellow-haired boy cried out, calling him number 218. As the smoke cleared, Jinho had already grabbed the gang leader by the collar, pulling him in close. He rammed his knee upward, kicking the leader square on the jaw. Everyone froze in shock. The boy, the gang members, all stunned that he had attacked their boss. But the gang leader only grinned. He hadn't even flinched. Jinho's eyes widened in disbelief. Was this body really so weak? The leader then seized Jinho by the collar, swinging him with brute strength and hurling him into the wall. He snarled that Jinho was marked for death now. As Jinho lay on the floor, a glowing screen appeared before his eyes. Synchronization progress 100%. Another window followed. Synchronization complete. Flat on the ground, Jinho smirked. Blue energy erupted from Jinho's body, coursing through his arms and legs as his muscles swelled with power. Dust swirled around him as the energy raged, shaking the floor. Taking a firm boxing stance, Jinho prepared for combat, a grin curling on his lips as he told the gang leader to get back inside. The leader scoffed, laughing mockingly. With a sneer, he clenched his fists and taunted, saying that for someone abandoned even by his own clan, Jinho was awfully full of himself. Jinho's grin didn't falter. In a calm but cutting tone, he told him to shut up and step in quickly, asking if he was scared. So, enraged, the gang leader shouted that he'd kill him just as he wished and lunged forward. Jinho responded instantly with a sharp sidekick, but the leader blocked it, seizing Jinho's foot. He grinned maliciously, muttering that this little rat would finally learn his place. But before he could finish, Jinho rotated his body and unleashed a devastating kick square into the side of the leader's head. The impact rattled him, forcing him to release his grip. Stumbling in disorientation, he couldn't recover before Jinho followed with another crushing kick to his jaw. The speed and force were astounding, sending blood spraying as his face twisted in pain. Jinho didn't stop there. Leaping into the air, he delivered a third brutal strike directly to the leader's face. The sheer power of the blow sent him crashing to the ground. Trembling, his bloodied and swollen face barely recognizable, the gang leader lay unconscious. Jinho glanced back at him and muttered coldly. This was exactly why he avoided using his legs. Furious at the sight, the surrounding gang members screamed, brandishing knives and shouting for Jinho's death. Jinho, unbothered, stepped on the fallen leader's body, twisted his arm behind him and gave a chilling ultimatum. If anyone dared come closer, he said, their leader would be begging for food for the rest of his life, and if they didn't like that, they could go fetch the warden. The members froze, baffled at his words. Jinho's voice hardened as he threatened further. If they didn't believe him, he would tear an arm off right then. Shocked, one of them panicked and ran off, yelling that he would bring the warden. The others gathered up their battered leader, muttering darkly that they wouldn't let him off next time. Watching them leave, Jinho thought to himself, that's exactly what he had to say. From the side, the boy watched in awe. His eyes gleamed with admiration as he asked how Jinho had learned to fight like that, marveling at his strength. Then, noticing Jinho properly, he hesitated and asked if he had always been that tall. He could have sworn Jinho was about his own height. Jinho replied casually, telling him to keep hoisting those stones. The boy frowned and muttered whether lifting rocks could really make someone taller. But Jinho wasn't listening anymore. His thoughts were racing. Synchronization, his real-life stats must have been transferred into this game-like body. Even so, it still felt underdeveloped compared to his real physique. What mattered now, however, was the actual stat screen. The screen appeared before him, displaying his information. His name, Zed Arahan. Class, Magician. A long list of traits appeared, including poison immunity, immortal duelist, and many others. But alongside them was a crushing penalty. His stats were heavily reduced due to stunted growth. 50 points were deducted from his base 100 in strength, agility, and endurance. His eyes narrowed as he scanned further. Something was wrong. Mana, 0. His mind reeled. Arahan. A magician, yet with no mana at all. How could they give him such pathetic stats and then transfer his consciousness into this body? Lying down on his bed, Jinho cursed the situation. This character was garbage. No wonder he had been discarded by the Banpinera clan. It wasn't surprising, they were cold, heartless people. For now, he told himself to calm down and examine things carefully. Looking again at the screen, he noted at least one advantage. Despite the penalties, his strength, agility, endurance, and perception all remain maxed at 100. Still, without proper training or nutrition, even those stats would be wasted on a frail, underfed body. But then there were the traits, so many, and all S rank. He recognized some, like poison immunity and immortal duelist, traits earned only through gameplay. If it weren't for the 0 mana, this character would be completely overpowered. His eyes fell on one in particular, Archmage's Blessings. This one, he thought, wasn't just for show. Sitting up, he resolved to learn the rest in due time. There had to be a way to fix the mana issue. Just then, a harsh voice rang out across the prison. Numbers were being called, one after another, and prisoners shuffled out in chains. The boy sighed heavily, muttering that they were leaving again. Zed, Jinho, asked what was going on. The boy explained that those were death row inmates being taken for their final meal. Before execution, they were allowed to eat whatever they wanted. A sly smile crossed Zed's face. This was it. He asked the boy for his name. The boy chuckled, realizing he had only ever referred to Jinho by his number. With a grin, he introduced himself as Rio, a child of the streets with no clan. He asked Jinho for his own name. Jinho smiled back. I am Zed Arahan. Disclaimer, from here on, Jinho will be referred to as Zed Arahan for clarity. Zed then asked Rio if he wanted to escape. Surprised, Rio said he had no intention of staying here long. He had his own reasons for leaving. Zed pressed further, asking if he had a plan. Rio shrugged, explaining the only exit was through the front gate. Locked by the warden himself, Zed raised a brow. So the only way was to defeat the warden and take the key. Rio panicked at the thought. The director Clark was a retired but formidable five-circle knight. Worse, he was infamous for his hatred of magicians. In the Last Savior universe, knights and magicians were sworn enemies. Zed thought carefully. A five-circle knight, retired or not, would be a terrifying opponent. Could he even defeat him in his current state? But aloud he suggested another way. Rio grinned knowingly and said they could just steal from him. Zed was intrigued. Steal? Rio explained that street kids like him learned to pick pockets before manners. The problem was the warden was always surrounded by watchful eyes. Opportunities were rare. Zed smirked. So that's how it was. He was beginning to form an idea. The next day, the prisoners were lined up. A guard shouted that under the warden's orders, workloads would be ramped up even further, and everyone was to run instead of walk. Frustrated, the prisoners protested, demanding moderation. But the guards snarled back, asking if they were rebelling against the warden. One prisoner muttered in irritation, but before he could finish, a blade was at his throat. The guard coldly reminded him that these were the warden's direct orders, and if he had a problem, he could take it up with the warden himself. Nervous, the prisoner raised his hands in surrender, asking what reason there even was for such cruelty. The guard cast a glance at Zed and sneered. Didn't they know yet whose fault this was? The prisoners turned, glaring angrily at Zed. The guard coughed and slipped away, muttering about needing a smoke. Rio panicked, whispering nervously that the mood was dangerous, but Zed cut him off, telling him to stay away. Inside, Zed's expression hardened. That bastard Clark. He was deliberately inciting a riot. Too cowardly to do it himself, he was turning the prisoners against him. So much for the honor of a knight. Rio backed away, running nervously. He thought to himself that this time even the wardens were involved. He couldn't let Zed die like this. Meanwhile, the prisoners grouped together, declaring that Zed had to die or they were all doomed. Zed smirked, telling them he understood. But he couldn't exactly let himself die, could he? The mob lunged, shouting for his death. But Zed sprang forward first, driving his knee into one man's jaw and knocking him out instantly. He declared that he couldn't just roll over, he needed this fight to vent his rage. The prisoners encircled him, charging together. Zed smirked again, telling them this was exactly what he wanted. Fists, kicks and blades came at him from all directions. Zed weaved through them, countering with precise jabs, punishing kicks and devastating knees. As he fought, his thoughts burned. This was what he had once wished for in the octagon. Not one opponent at a time, but dozens, all charging together. This was true exhilaration. Laughing, he shouted for them to come harder, to fight more aggressively. Dodging a strike, he revelled in the thrill of danger, smirking darkly. This rush, this addiction to battle, was why he had embraced martial arts in the first place. He pummeled them mercilessly, demanding more and more as his frenzy grew. His eyes widened with a manic light, lost in the madness of the fight. From a distance, Rio watched in awe, gasping in disbelief at the sight of Zed crushing the mob. But then, prisoner 589, the gang leader, appeared behind Rio, calling him over. With him was prisoner 245, who sneered and declared that it would be better if Zed stopped rampaging and simply died. After all, friends were precious, weren't they? Rio's throat was seized, his neck about to be snapped. He gasped softly, calling out Zed's name. Zed froze, then his lips curled into a smile. His voice turned cold as steel. Those bastards had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. Prisoner 245 grinned wickedly, tightening his grip on the knife. With a sneer, he mocked that all Zed had was his mouth, saying it should be considered an honor that someone of his caliber was even paying attention to him. After all, he was a two-circle knight. His voice rose as he roared, calling Zed a pathetic Arahan with no manner, someone destined only for doom. With that, he leapt into the air, lunging straight at Zed, but Zed effortlessly sidestepped, vanishing from 245's sight. The next moment, he appeared near Rio, already having neutralized prisoner 589 and calmly conversing with him. Shocked, 245 shouted in disbelief, demanding to know how Zed had managed such a feat without the use of magic. Zed smirked, replying that it wasn't magic, it was... Yet before completing his sentence, he shifted into stance. With fluid elegance, he spun gracefully and delivered a devastating kick directly to 245's neck. The prisoner was hurled across the ground, sliding and crashing from the sheer impact. As Zed glanced sideways, the doors burst open. Director Clark entered with his guards in tow. Clark's sharp voice rang out, ordering Zed, prisoner 218, to explain himself. Before Zed could respond, Rio stepped forward, pleading on his behalf. He revealed that 218 had been the victim, even taken hostage in the attempt on his life. Everything had been pure self-defense. Clark surveyed the scene, seeing the prisoners utterly beaten. Narrowing his eyes, he asked Zed a single pointed question. Had he unleashed his mana? Zed, expression calm and indifferent, replied ambiguously, "I wonder." At that, Clark released his aura. A suffocating purple energy surged outward, pressing down on everyone. The sheer weight of it forced the prisoners to their knees, gasping and muttering about how they couldn't breathe. Yet Zed stood unaffected, the energy swirling harmlessly around him like a barrier. Rio, on the ground and struggling for air, stared in disbelief. Could Zed really withstand the aura of a five-circle knight? No ordinary person should be capable of such a thing. Meanwhile, Zed himself was puzzled. A glowing screen suddenly appeared before his eyes. Trait: Champion's noble soul resists suppression. He raised an eyebrow. This was a trait he had never encountered before. Resistance? His lips curled into a smirk as he realized. Could this be a form of mental immunity? If so, it was an outrageous ability. After all, he had once reached the pinnacle of his world. Standing firmly under Clark's oppressive aura, Zed thought coldly that there was no way a half-baked five-circle amateur could hold him down. He saw right through the game being played. Clark, shocked, could only mutter in disbelief. How could Zed still be standing, especially without even unlocking his mana? Gritting his teeth, Clark intensified his aura further. The ground cracked beneath the pressure, violent energy shaking the hall. But Zed remained motionless, smiling faintly, entirely unaffected. As everyone around them gasped for breath, barely holding on, Zed thought to himself with satisfaction. An S-rank trait, no less. What would Clark do about it now? Clark's jaw dropped, unable to process what he was seeing. Even his guards pleaded for him to stop, unable to endure the crushing weight. With an annoyed click of his tongue, Clark finally withdrew his aura. Inwardly, he admitted that had this continued, his own anger might have driven him to draw his sword. Ordering everyone back to work, Clark turned to leave. But Zed's voice cut through the silence. He declared that he had something to say. Clark paused, demanding to know what it was. Facing him directly, Zed declared that he was done stacking stone towers, tired of constantly fearing prisoner attacks. He planned to put an end to it all. He would become a death row inmate. Rio gasped in shock, demanding what he was saying. But Zed only smirked, doubling down on his claim. Clark's eyes narrowed. Did Zed truly understand what that meant? He warned that if this was a mere whim, he would not forgive it. Zed sneered, accusing him of being worried about backtracking, and demanded the decision be recorded on a crystal ball. Clark grinned at that. Indeed, there was no better proof. He ordered the warden to fetch the crystal ball immediately. Zed in turn smirked and declared his final meal. He wanted Verity beef, a huge portion of it, enough to eat to his fill. The guards gasped in disbelief. Verity beef? That was an extravagant demand. It was the highest quality beef, raised only on the Verity Prairie in the Southern Empire, legendary even in the Last Savior game. It was said to be so delicious that it could restore lost strength, even turn the tide of battle. With a sly grin, he stated that considering the cost of his life, it was only fair. And since he only dealt in S-rank items, he warned them not to try any tricks. Rio, stunned, questioned Zed's sanity, but Zed casually added that Rio would be joining him as well. Enough portions should be prepared. For two. Clark gave the order, and the guards confirmed. Later, within his cell, Zed trained relentlessly while waiting for the rare beef to be procured. It would take a week, but during that time he remained focused, served by the wardens, never halting his push-ups or exercises. Rio, watching with exasperation, sighed that they were on the brink of death, yet Zed still insisted on working out. Zed's thoughts, however, remained sharp. In Last Savior, a special system ensured that whenever one of his stats increased, the excess experience flowed into others. And with all his stats already maxed except mana, every bit of growth here would channel into that one attribute. When the guards finally summoned them, Zed smirked knowingly. Rio, in despair, clutched his head, wondering if this was truly the end. Before them was laid a banquet of meat. Tears filled Rio's eyes as he devoured the feast, claiming he had never eaten anything so delicious. Zed chuckled, reminding him it was all thanks to him. Notifications flashed before Zed's eyes, penalties partially eased. He felt the flood of experience rushing in, his body brimming with newfound strength. The first objective was complete. Now, the next awaited. Meanwhile, in his office, Clark brooded over what had happened that day. He couldn't forget how Zed had shrugged off his aura, something impossible even for a young magician without mana. Staring at a bracelet in his hand, he vowed to uncover the truth and to repay the humiliations several times over. Back in the hall, Zed clenched his fist, reveling in the surge of power coursing through him. He couldn't wait to test it. Clark arrived, addressing Zed directly by his true name, Zed Arahan. Zed quipped that he must be sulking over not having a share of the feast. Clark, however, placed a hand on his shoulder, his thoughts dark. This arrogant Arahan, relying only on his pedigree, Clark would make certain his wretched face was twisted in agony. Zed smirked back unfazed. Clark thought to himself that Arahan came from the most elite magical family, and even the tiniest piece of intel about them could bring massive profit. Depending on the quality of that information, one could even live out their life in seclusion. Just then, Clark's bracelet began to glow, releasing waves of magical energy. Zed's eyes narrowed as he recognized it. He thought it was a magic tool. Suddenly, a violent burst of purple energy erupted from Clark's body. Laughing hysterically, Clark taunted Zed, declaring that even he wouldn't be spared. But Zed only smirked, completely unfazed by the display. The violent surge of energy intensified. Rio collapsed under the crushing pressure, clutching at Clark's rope. Irritated, Clark pushed Rio away in anger and shouted at him furiously. Zed sneered, mocking Clark and telling him to behave himself. That only pushed Clark further into rage. He stretched out both arms towards Zed, releasing an immense surge of energy. Yet Zed remained calm. Clark then exerted himself to his very limits, pouring out everything he had. Zed sighed, unimpressed. With ease, he brushed Clark aside and remarked coldly that if Clark wanted someone executed, he should do it properly instead of whining like a child. Clark was left utterly stunned. Sweat rolled down his face as his thoughts raced. He had even used his magic tool, yet it was useless. That meant Zed's mana was at least one circle higher. Could it be that he was a six-circle magician? No, it couldn't be possible. Unless this was the power of the Arahan bloodline. A 5-circle was the product of a lifetime's effort, and yet even Clark's full might couldn't force Zed to bend. Clark's gaze fell on his bracelet, his mind blank with shock and disbelief. Zed looked at him and asked calmly if he was done with all his futile effort. Clark exhaled in defeat. Turning around, he declared that the execution would be carried out the very next morning. Even the great Arahan couldn't go against the law decreed by the Imperial Majesty. He told Zed to enjoy his final night. Inside the warden's office, Clark scribbled something into a book. His thoughts lingered on the events, noting that, though he hadn't yet figured it all out, the record might be valuable in the days ahead. Exhausted from pushing his mana to its limits and using his magic tool, he still forced himself to complete the report before resting. Meanwhile, inside the cell, moonlight streamed in through the window. The light fell on Rio's face, making him stir awake, eyes tightening against its brightness. Zed stood by his side and asked if he had woken up, concerned about his condition. Rio groaned, saying he felt nauseous and close to vomiting. But Zed, smiling faintly, complimented him on having quite a knack with his hands. Rio chuckled proudly, sliding a chain of keys and asking what Zed thought of his skill. Zed smiled back, telling him he did well. Inwardly, he admitted that for a normal person such a feat would have been dangerous, yet Rio proved surprisingly resilient. Rio explained that his trick had worked only because Clark was focused on Zed. He then asked if Zed was really fine. Zed replied calmly that he was perfectly all right. Suspicious, Rio remarked that something about this felt strange, as if there was more he didn't know. Zed brushed it off with a joke, telling him to just lift more stones. Then, opening his status bar, Zed noticed that his strength, agility, and endurance had each risen by 10 points. It was exactly as promised, nutritious and rewarding. While his consistent training had helped, this result was still extraordinary. He focused inwardly, feeling how satisfying his body had become. Though he wished he could shed the penalties sooner, he knew that was unlikely. Afterwards, Zed sat on the bed and told Rio they needed to head out that night. Once Rio recovered enough, they would escape. Rio hesitated, saying that the warden would notice any moment, but Zed, smirking, assured him not to worry. The warden would already be passed out by now. Rio was shocked, asking how he could be so sure. Zed knew the answer. That bracelet Clark wore was a coveted magic tool, one he couldn't even recall by name. It instantly amplified mana, but left behind immense fatigue. By now, Clark would be unconscious somewhere. Considering how Clark had shown up with the key and even used that tool, Zed thought to himself that his plan had become much easier. Later, when both were ready, Zed urged Rio to head out with him. If Rio was afraid, so be it. Rio checked on him again, asking if he was really all right, then joked that since Zed was his sidekick, he had no choice but to stick with him. But then, Rio frowned, realizing there was no room key to open the cell. Zed simply told him to step aside. With a single powerful kick, he shattered the door apart. Rio was stunned at the display, asking if Zed was really a magician. The noise alerted the guards. They shouted at Zed, demanding to know what he was doing. Zed confidently declared that it was an escape. The guards roared in anger as Zed and Rio bolted out, ordering one another to capture them. Rio, struggling to keep pace, warned Zed that the main gate ahead was blocked. Indeed, several guards stood in formation before the gate. Swords drawn, they charged forward regardless. The guards shouted to hold them off at all costs, and their comrades answered in unison. Zed yelled at Rio to keep running and not stop. Rio, sweating heavily and nearly out of breath, still pushed forward, responding that he understood. One of the guards swung his sword at Zed, but Zed sidestepped effortlessly. He then grabbed the guard by the face and hurled him aside, the man crashing into others. Another guard lunged, but before he could act, Zed struck him in the throat. The guard convulsed, choking and unable to breathe. Zed dashed past, scattering guards with his overwhelming speed and power. More attacks came, but he dodged them fluidly. One kick smashed into a guard's head, sending him sprawling. Another was struck down with similar force. The guards kept charging, yet Zed grinned, muttering in annoyance before striking them down one after another. From the side, Rio could only watch in disbelief, murmuring that it was insane. Soon after, Clark arrived at the gate, furious at the chaos. Guards lay unconscious across the ground. Hearing that number 218 had escaped, his rage boiled over. He roared at his men to catch them immediately. Meanwhile, in Matama village near the detention center, Zed and Rio hid inside a barrel in a quiet alley. Emerging, Rio told Zed that Clark had likely lost track of them. Zed asked where they were, and Rio explained that it was Mota, the only village nearby. Zed noted that the guards would naturally come here first. But Rio reasoned that they couldn't help it. The other towns were too far. If they blended in with the locals, they'd be safe. Zed accepted, asking what Rio's plan was. Rio pulled out a rugged old shirt, telling him to put it on. Zed scoffed, saying it looked like the trash a beggar would wear. Rio countered that the village was full of beggars, so disguising as one was their safest bet. After changing, Rio told Zed he'd fetch some necessities and that Zed should wait quietly. Zed questioned how Rio planned to get supplies without money. Rio smirked, asking why money would be necessary. Watching him leave, Zed thought that Rio's way of thinking was truly unusual. Rio returned soon after with coloured lenses. Zed tried on the blue pair, asking if it was enough. Rio explained that it was acceptable. Red eyes marked Arahan's lineage, so disguising them was crucial. In the southern regions under the Bahal clan, blue lenses were fashionable among nobles. Eye colour was treated like a fashion accessory. Zed recognized the Bahal clan immediately. His former character in the game had been Torres Bahal. Arahan for mages, Bahal for swordsmen, two rival houses that despised each other. Even their eye colours were opposites. Rio then told Zed he had found a good resting place nearby and led him there. In the woods they came across a stable. Both lay down on the hay to sleep. As Zed rested, he thought about his bizarre circumstances. Opening his eyes in this world felt like waking up inside a game, and now he was forced to hide in filthy stables. Still, in a strange way, it was almost fun. He looked over at Rio, wondering why the boy stuck so closely to him despite the danger. Rio was just a street kid, a pickpocket. Zed needed his help for now, but could he really keep trusting him? Morning came. Zed woke up, finally able to see the stable clearly. It was filthy, covered in dirt and dung. He questioned if he had really slept in such a place. Rio stretched awake, teasing Zed that perhaps being a noble made him uncomfortable in places like this. Zed retorted, asking if anyone could actually like such conditions. Rio explained that he hadn't chosen it out of love, but necessity. Zed complained that he couldn't keep living like this. He needed to earn money. Rio asked how he planned to do that while avoiding the warden's eye, suggesting instead that Zed learn some pickpocketing. But Zed, resolute, told him to forget pickpocketing and instead find the place he mentioned. The scene shifted. In the underground arena, two fighters clashed brutally before a roaring crowd. Watching them, Zed smirked. The crowd roared, cheering wildly for the fighters. Watching the scene, Rio nervously remarked that Zed must have come to the wrong place. But Zed, smirking, replied that they were exactly where they should be. Inside the arena, one fighter bit down hard on his opponent's arm, only to be met with a clean punch to the face. Another man joined in, striking him as well, but the first fighter swiftly blocked the blow and countered with a brutal punch to the ribs, dealing serious damage. And so, the audience erupted with jeers and shouts. Some yelled at the challenger to fight properly since they had placed all their bets on him. Observing the match, Zed thought to himself that he had expected nothing more than a sloppy street brawl. The fight was far more intense than he had anticipated. Rio, growing uneasy, muttered that the place was terrifying and begged to leave quickly. The Icas then delivered a heavy blow squarely to the challenger's face and began pummeling him with a barrage of relentless punches. Rio, horrified by the violence, exclaimed to Zed that killing someone here seemed like nothing, and that Icas was incomparably stronger than the Carrion convicts they had seen before. Turning to Zed, he added that trying to take on such a man with mere grappling techniques was pure hopelessness. But before Rio could even finish, Zed had vanished from his side. Gasps echoed through the crowd as they saw Zed suddenly standing inside the arena, catching the arm of the second fighter mid-punch. Calmly, Zed told him to take it easy. Rio's eyes went wide in shock and terror. His thoughts screamed, "Why the hell did you climb up there, you crazy bastard?" Zed turned to the referee and questioned him sharply, calling him out by number and accusing him of being bribed. He asked why the fight was being allowed to continue. The outcome was already decided, demanding to know if there were any rules at all in this place. The enraged fighter snarled back, warning that if Zed were a noble, things would be even worse for him. But Zed only smiled and answered that he was no noble, clearly just a street kid. That single declaration sent the crowd into a frenzy. People cursed him, calling him a lowlife who dared ruin their fun. Zed, clearly annoyed, pointed toward the fighter and declared that it was too noisy. He said he'd take full responsibility and claimed that he was the one who should be fighting. With a grin, he promised to give them something entertaining. Rio, furious and panicked, berated Zed. He reminded him that Icas's strength far exceeded normal limits, and with the entire atmosphere in his favor, the odds of winning were 1 in 1,000, or even 1 in 10,000. He cried that no matter what the gods or the goddess of fortune decided, Zed had no chance. To him, this was absolutely forbidden, a fight that should never happen. But Zed simply covered his ears in irritation, telling Rio to quiet down and to bet everything on him. Rio was stunned, shouting back that Zed wasn't listening, demanding that he stop and come down immediately. But Zed only laughed and casually said that after the match they should go feast on beef together because there was no tomorrow. The fight began. Icas narrowed his eyes, glaring at Zed. His thoughts betrayed both surprise and unease. Icas noted the steady breathing, the unsettling gaze, and the calculated distance Zed maintained, completely unlike the others. The intimidation was overwhelming, yet perfectly controlled. His own body trembled as the realization crept in. Was he actually afraid of this man? Grinding his teeth, Icas lunged forward at full speed. But before he could reach, a sharp punch struck him cleanly from the side. Zed calmly explained that a punch wasn't meant to be swung back from behind the shoulders. As he pummeled Icas with lightning-fast strikes, Zed continued his lecture. He said a proper punch should come directly from a guard stance, delivered in the shortest, fastest, and cleanest path straight to the opponent's face. Sometimes, he added, it should even carry the full weight of the body behind it. Finally, Zed delivered a single crushing blow to Icas's face, leaving it swollen, bloodied, and toothless. The crowd was stunned. Some whispered in disbelief, wondering if Icas was deliberately holding back, but others shouted that he wasn't. Zed was truly overwhelming him. Meanwhile, Rio clasped his hands in desperate prayer, begging the gods of war, fortune, miracles, and life to let Zed survive. Yet when he cracked open his eyes, he saw a scene he couldn't believe. Zed dominating completely, with Icas battered and helpless. Jaw dropping, Rio could only think, is this real, Zed actually beating Icas? Ikas's head spun as dizziness overtook him. His vision blurred and his thoughts grew desperate. What the hell is this? Are you telling me I can lose to a kid like him? Fueled by anger, he swung desperately, but Zed easily ducked and countered with more crushing blows. The audience screamed at Ikas, demanding to know why he couldn't dodge such pathetic punches, calling the fight insane, but their cries went unanswered. With one final decisive strike, Zed ended the match. Ikas collapsed, unconscious and broken. Zed looked at the referee and mocked him, asking if he should continue fighting without rules. The referee, awkward and fearful, quickly raised Zed's hand and announced that the challenger had won. Zed muttered in disappointment, thinking that the fight had ended before he could even warm up, regretting not holding back more. Later, holding a small pouch of money, Zed was visibly annoyed. He complained that since the odds were 62-1, his payout should be far greater. He accused the staff of cheating him just because he was young. But the receptionist calmly explained that the calculations were exact. Suspicious, Zed pressed further and asked Rio how much he had bet. Rio, sweating nervously and looking away, avoided answering. This angered Zed, who reminded him that he had told him to bet everything. Rio weakly defended himself, saying he hated gambling and wanted to save money for dinner. Just then, a woman with striking blue hair entered, flanked by two massive bodyguards. Smiling politely, she greeted Zed and asked for a moment of his time. When Zed bluntly asked who she was, the woman replied that his cluelessness revealed it must be his first time here. She introduced herself as Herna, the manager of the arena, and said she wished to speak further. But Zed immediately cut her off, refusing outright. Towering bodyguards stepped forward, blocking his path. Zed glanced up at them with sharp eyes and warned that if they pushed further, they'd end up like Ikas, out cold for days. Herna's smile remained as she explained that Ikas, the man Zed defeated, had been a champion she personally scouted from the big city. She told him he should understand the meaning behind her words. For now, she said, she would let him go, but promised that they would meet again next time in a more relaxed setting. With a gleam of excitement, she added that she truly loved strong opponents. Zed stared back at her with a serious expression, the tension between them left hanging. After some time, Zed and Rio arrived at a tavern. Rio let out a sigh and warned Zed not to act cocky in front of that woman. Herna might seem like just the arena manager, but in truth, she was the real power behind the city. As long as they stayed here, they were bound to cross paths with her again. Zed dismissed her, saying she looked like nothing more than an old fox obsessed with money. Rio nodded, agreeing wholeheartedly, and revealed that people literally called her the old fox. Zed's mind drifted back to his past. It had been the same when he first stepped into the martial arts world. Once his talent started to shine, countless managers came knocking. Most only saw him as a money-making tool, and he had been scammed more than once. Back then, he was nothing more than a naive rookie from the provinces. By sheer luck, he had met his current manager, the one who shaped him into a champion. He had endured it all and climbed to the top. He was a champion. Old fox, huh? He thought. Let's see who the more seasoned one really is. Just then, their food arrived. Rio's eyes sparkled as he exclaimed that it was Verity beef, but Zed quickly stopped him. He told Rio to wait. That meat was fake. The colour and marbling were completely wrong. Confused, Rio asked what marbling even meant. Zed explained that even the warden had taken a full week to procure real Verity beef. If it could be bought so easily from a neighbouring city, it wouldn't have taken that long. He pointed at the other tables around them. Beef was supposed to be extremely exclusive. There was no way this tavern could serve it to every customer. This wasn't Verity beef at all, but the lower grade wagey beef. And though it was only one grade lower, the difference was vast. Rio was shocked, but tried to shrug it off, saying that once it was in the stomach, wasn't it all the same? Zed wasn't convinced. He called the waiter, demanding fairness. If they paid for Verity beef, they deserved to be served Verity beef. As customers, it was their right. The waiter grew irritated, snapping that they'd been nothing but a nuisance, dragging things out when they had only ordered a single serving. He told them to eat quickly and leave. Zed's glare sharpened. He reminded the waiter that what he had been served was fake, and that they had every right to get the correct dish. The waiter sneered, mocking him. Did Zed really think such tricks only worked on the streets? Zed's patience snapped. He demanded to see the boss. Licking his tongue, the waiter muttered that this punk had completely lost it, but eventually told them to shut up and follow him. Before long, they were standing in front of the tavern boss, surrounded by his men brandishing knives. The boss sized them up and called them unruly lowlifes. Zed shot back immediately, accusing him of selling fakes. The boss only laughed, admiring Zed's guts, but mocking him for not knowing how to read the room. Zed clenched his fist and smiled. He told the boss that he clearly didn't understand the situation. If anyone charged at him now, which side did he think would end up dead? The boss sneered, amused by his swagger, and promised to teach him a harsh lesson about life. His men lunged forward to attack. But Zed dismantled their strikes effortlessly, taking them down one by one with flawless precision. The boss's confident smile collapsed into sheer horror. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. Ryo grinned from the sidelines, cheering Zed on. He reminded the shaken boss who this man really was, the one who had even defeated Icas. The boss's thoughts turned frantic. He had laughed off Icas's defeat, but now he realized the truth. Shaken, he demanded to know what Zed wanted. Zed's tone turned serious. At last they were speaking the same language. He only wanted fair compensation. He was a reasonable man. Raising 2 fingers, he laid out his conditions. First, return the money they had paid. Second, from now on, the tavern would cover the cost of their meals, all served at Verity beef prices. The boss's face went pale with shock. He exclaimed in disbelief, calling them thugs for making such demands. Night fell. At the hotel, Ryo sank into bed, marveling at how soft it was. He had never slept so comfortably before. With a grin, he admitted that Zed's performance earlier had been incredible, truly the mark of a noble. Zed, lying back, replied calmly, "If rumors spread, the restaurant could go under. For someone without bargaining power, negotiation was pure hell." Ryo laughed, remembering the boss's face turning bright red in anger. Thanks to that scene, they were now living in luxury. Zed only told him to get some sleep. Later that night, Ryo stirred awake. He checked if Zed was asleep. Seeing him still lying still, he quietly slipped out, pulling on his clothes. But the moment he left, Zed opened his eyes. He had been awake all along. Days passed. During training, Ryo complained that he was hungry and scolded Zed for never taking breaks, always working his body to the limit. Magicians hated sweating more than death itself. Was this because Zed had no mana? Breathing heavily, Zed answered that it was something like that. But inwardly, he stared at his stat screen with frustration. No matter how many times he checked, it never increased. At last, Zed told Ryo their morning workout was done and suggested they eat. Ryo eagerly asked what they'd eat. Potato salad, chicken stew? Zed smiled and proposed beef instead. Ryo's eyes lit up instantly. Zed thought to himself that they hadn't been to a steakhouse in 3 days, mostly to avoid unnecessary trouble. But on their first day, they had devoured 10 servings, and with the cash they had, it had been no problem. Turning to Ryo, he asked how many gold coins they had left. Ryo admitted it wasn't much. The city's cost of living was sky high. Zed agreed, but inwardly he was calculating. Spending 50 gold in just a few days, that was absurd. He suspected Ryo thought his noble background made him ignorant of worldly affairs. Was this simple greed, gambling? For now, Zed let it slide. There was no sign of betrayal yet, but he couldn't ignore it forever. Meanwhile, at the restaurant, word reached the boss that Zed and Ryo had returned. His pride, already bruised, burned with humiliation. He vowed to be ready this time. Inside, the waiter presented them with a grand buffet of meat. Ryo's eyes went wide at the sight, marveling at its worth. The waiter urged them to enjoy freely and call out if they needed anything. Zed's gaze narrowed. Why were they suddenly being so friendly? Ryo teased him, asking if he had changed clothes to earn such treatment. Zed denied it, but inside suspicion grew. The restaurant was the same as last time. No assassins in sight. What were they plotting? Ryo picked up a piece of meat wrapped in cabbage and offered it to Zed with a smile, telling him to eat it in one bite. Zed thanked him, but just as he was about to eat, a sudden sensation jolted through him. His instinct screamed. He shouted at Ryo to spit it out immediately. That meat was poisoned. Ryo suddenly spat out the food, coughing violently and forcing every bit of it from his mouth. His face turned pale as he gasped, asking in fear if the meat had been poisoned and whether he was about to die. Zed calmly told him that such a small amount wouldn't be fatal. When he glanced at his status screen, it displayed a special trait. Absolute poison immunity resists frog's poison. Zed's thoughts darkened. So this was their scheme. How dare they coat the meat with poison? Without his trait, he would have been silently eliminated. All the suffering he had endured to obtain this ability had finally proven its worth. The status screen further explained, absolute poison immunity, rank S acquisition condition, only obtainable by consuming all poisons in the Empire in order of rank while repeatedly using antidotes. Meanwhile, Rio, resting his head on the table, muttered that the meat had no taste or smell. Was it really poison? How could Zed have known? Zed's reply was short and heavy. It was because he was an Arahan. Hearing this, Rio sighed, remarking that nobles of such rank truly were on another level. But then his voice lowered in worry. What should they do now? It seemed obvious someone wanted them dead. Shouldn't they run? Zed folded his arms, anger simmering. Run? Why should they run? Instead, he smirked and declared that those responsible would pay dearly. Just then, the restaurant boss entered the dining room, complaining under his breath. If those beggars wanted to eat, they should have done so quietly. Why act like they owned the place? But Zed, seated at the table with arms crossed, only smirked. He said he had called the man to clear up a few misunderstandings and had some questions for him. The boss eyed the empty plates and thought smugly. They had eaten a mountain of food laced with frog's poison. The effects should be kicking in soon. Out loud, he accused them of being nothing more than thugs who extorted money from honest people. Zed chuckled and told him he was mistaken. To make peace, they should simply share a meal. At that, Rio offered a piece of meat to the boss, calling it a wrap. The boss grew nervous, asking why he was being given food. Zed leaned forward, explaining it was a gesture of reconciliation. If accepted, he would even withdraw one of his earlier demands. After all, they weren't real bandits. But the boss scoffed and refused. He would never make peace with them. Zed's smile thinned. Strange, did the man truly want to keep being extorted, or was there another reason he wouldn't eat? Perhaps because the meat was poisoned? The boss stiffened but denied it outright. Zed's patience snapped. He suddenly flipped the entire table, sending dishes crashing to the ground. The boss flinched in panic. Had Zed realized the truth? That he hadn't eaten any of the meat? Zed's voice was cold as he accused him directly. How dare he poison the food? The boss slammed his hand against the wall, pretending to be confident. He demanded proof, though his inner thoughts betrayed him. There was no way they could have figured it out. Zed slowly removed his lenses, revealing crimson eyes. With a twisted grin, he told the boss that this was his proof. The boss's heart sank. Red eyes and an Arahan! Zed's voice cut sharp as a blade. How dare he try to deceive an Arahan? He would pay with his life. The boss collapsed in terror, trembling uncontrollably. No! He screamed. But Zed's tone was merciless. One person disappearing here would hardly cause an issue. On his knees, the boss begged desperately, hands clasped. He admitted his mistake and pleaded for forgiveness, promising never to err again. His mind was blank with fear. He couldn't even form natural doubts about why a Western Arahan would be here, disguising himself as a wanderer. All he saw was overwhelming power. Zed smirked to himself, realizing just how much authority the title of Arahan carried. Perhaps he should use it more often. Out loud, he told the boss that since he had shown sincerity, mercy would be granted this once. The boss groveled, thanking him profusely. Zed then issued 2 commands. First, never reveal his identity to anyone. The boss swore an oath, vowing silence even beyond the grave. Second, half of his wealth was to be handed over immediately and the incident would be forgotten. Shocked but desperate, the boss agreed, grateful to still be alive. Money meant nothing if he died. He promised to fetch it right away before Zed could change his mind. Zed calmly put his lenses back on. Rio remarked in awe that only an Arahan could wield such authority. Zed replied that once they had the money, they would leave the city that very night. Rio nodded in agreement. But just then, Herna walked in. With a sly smirk, she greeted them warmly, saying it had been a while. Her tone carried amusement as she admitted Zed had turned out to be quite impressive. Zed narrowed his eyes. Could it be she already knew he was an Arahan? No, that cowardly boss wouldn't dare betray him. The only possible source was somewhere else. If his bluff was exposed, he could lose everything. He needed to act carefully. He asked Herna for a private conversation. Sitting before her, he directly asked what business she had with him. Herna smirked, saying he misunderstood. It wasn't that she had no business with him, but today, her real meeting was with her client. Zed's eyes widened when he realized. Could it be Rio? Lowering his head, Rio apologized. He hadn't meant to hide it, but Herna interrupted, explaining she had investigated his request. However, she now demanded more money. Rio's voice cracked with anger. That wasn't their deal. He had already paid a fortune. Herna dismissed his protest coldly. What he had paid barely covered her meals. Did he think finding his missing sibling, whose life or death was uncertain, was easy? Rio broke down, crying in despair. That had been his last hope. Zed watched silently, then spoke. They could tie both matters together. Herna wanted something from him, didn't she? If she fulfilled Rio's request, he would accept hers. Herna's eyes glinted with interest. Indeed, she said. Her request was simple. Zed had to fight Icus one more time. Rio immediately protested. It was an obvious trap. But Zed accepted without hesitation, only confirming that Rio's request would be honored as well. Herna licked her lips and promised she always kept her word. Later, as they walked down a quiet alley, Rio sulked while carrying a box of money. Zed asked why he looked so gloomy when he had just gained so much. Rio admitted he never meant to deceive Zed, but had secretly gone to Herna out of desperation. Zed said he already knew. Stunned, Rio asked why he never confronted him. Zed answered simply, because he didn't care. The help Rio had given him was worth that much, but he warned him sternly, never again. From now on, nothing should be hidden. Betrayal of trust was the lowest act. Rio promised, though still sulking. Then he begged Zed not to attend the rematch. They should take the money and leave. But Zed asked, what about his sibling? Rio admitted the truth. That woman would betray them again. He knew it, but he had been too desperate. Herna was the kind of adult who preyed on desperate children. Zed's eyes hardened. He admitted he had also considered leaving, but now he had changed his mind. Rio was stunned. Did Zed really plan to go through with it? Herna would throw everything against him this time. Zed's smirk returned. All the more reason. When trash stood in his way, he wanted to clean it up, and defeating an opponent, giving their all, that was the most exhilarating feeling of all. Meanwhile, inside Carrion Detention Center, guards assembled before Clark. He ordered the vanguard to move out immediately. A menacing aura radiated from him as his teeth clenched in fury. Those rats had been hiding under his nose all along. This time, he would end it for good. 3 days later, Zed stood in the middle of the arena, surrounded by a deafening roar of the crowd, cheering with overwhelming noise. His eyes were fixed on Icus, and a thought immediately crossed his mind. Despite everything Icus had gone through, he still looked just as confident as before. That smug face made no sense. Something about it felt wrong. From outside the arena, Rio watched nervously. He called out to Zed, telling him that if things became too dangerous, he must promise to stop immediately. The referee's voice thundered across the stage, announcing the long-awaited rematch between Icus and the beggar. The fight was about to begin. But then a sudden shift swept through the crowd. Gasps echoed everywhere, and jaws dropped in disbelief. Even Rio was caught off guard, muttering curses under his breath. To everyone's shock, Icus had taken up a boxing stance, perfectly copying Zed's moves. Inside his own thoughts, Icus admitted his unease. Herna's absolute certainty about this fight had brought him here, but an Arahan with no mana? That didn't sound right at all. Still, Zed had been left to rot in prison. Perhaps it was true. Without hesitation, Icus lunged at Zed. While unleashing his strikes, he focused on keeping his punches tight and direct from the chest, mixing them with sharp kicks. A fierce combination followed, punches and kicks in rapid succession, each one mimicking Zed's style. With a mocking tone, he made it clear that Zed was not the only one capable of such techniques. After practicing them himself, he realized just how useful they were. Zed dodged swiftly, weaving left and right through the attacks, but even he had to admit this was unexpected. His eyes dropped toward Icus's lower stance, and in that instant, Zed's fist shot forward. A clean right hook slammed against the side of Icus's head. Instead of falling, Icus smirked and demanded if Zed was serious, shouting that the hit didn't even hurt. He mocked him further, saying this proved that without mana, Zed was nothing more than a weakling. Zed's gaze turned serious as he muttered inwardly. So that was the truth, after all. The crowd's voices surged again, chattering excitedly. Some marveled at how Icus had suddenly grown much stronger, while others praised him as Athena's champion. But Zed had already pieced it together. The belt around Icus's waist wasn't ordinary, it was the Ogre's belt. He knew it well, an artifact capable of negating 90% of all physical damage. A completely absurd ability. Against someone with mana, it was strong. Against him with his mana stat at 0, it was the worst opponent imaginable. Now, from the sidelines, Rio grew frantic. Zed's attacks weren't leaving a single mark. His face twisted with worry as he shouted that Herna must have tampered with something. He warned that the match was far too dangerous. But Zed simply smiled, telling Rio it was fine and to sit back and watch. That smile left Rio frozen in shock. Was Zed actually smiling at a time like this? Icus continued to taunt, asking if Zed was about to give up. But Zed firmly replied that he wasn't. His stance shifted, his tone sharper, declaring that while he had been caught off guard at first, this moment was exactly what he had been waiting for. Icus blinked in surprise as Zed's posture changed, but before he could react, Zed's sudden kick smashed into his face, disorienting him instantly. Another followed, striking his stomach with crushing force. For the first time, Icus realized he was being pushed back. Kim Jin-ho, the strongest man on Earth, now living as Zed, felt a surge of true excitement for the very first time. No opponent had ever lasted long enough for him to unleash his full power. Most had fallen in less than a minute, but this one was different. Even after taking heavy kicks, Icus was still standing. For Zed, or rather Kim Jin-ho, this was unprecedented. He pressed on, launching a relentless storm of kicks, left, right, centre, each blow battering Icus without pause. His body grew bruised, beaten and exhausted, dizziness setting in with every strike. Icus's mind screamed in frustration. He couldn't predict Zed's movements, let alone block them. How could this man possibly be a mage? Zed's face twisted into something terrifying as he spoke, telling Icus not to even think about falling. It didn't hurt, did it? Panic surged through Icus, and he shouted for the match to stop, attempting to forfeit. But before the words could leave his mouth, Zed's knee drove into his jaw. A crushing sidekick followed, striking with enough force to shatter the ogre's belt. The artifact broke apart, and the instant it did, unbearable pain flooded Icus's body. He collapsed to his knees, overwhelmed. Zed looked down at him and demanded to know why he wasn't standing. Terrified, Icus screamed that he had lost, begging for the match to be withdrawn. But Zed's foot landed against his face, pinning him down. With a smirk, he declared that ending it now would be a waste. Icus's heart filled with terror. With trembling lips, he muttered a single word, "Arahan," before passing out cold. Zed looked at him in silence, wondering if he had truly fainted. But suddenly an alien sensation spread from deep within his chest. Something unfamiliar and writhing coursed through his body. A faint blue energy emerged from his core, and his status screen appeared before his eyes. Zed's breath caught. His mana stat had finally risen from 0 to 1. Overwhelmed with exhilaration, he clenched his fists as his body flooded with endorphins. It was far better than he had ever imagined. A mage without mana? That idea had been ridiculous from the very start. But then he noticed the silence. The crowd around him was deathly still. Rio came running, shouting in alarm. He cried out that Zed had removed his lenses. Confused, Zed replied that he hadn't. Then realization struck him. His mana must have dissolved them. His true eyes were exposed. Rio stared at them, shocked. They were even redder than before, glowing intensely. Whispers rippled through the arena, spreading like wildfire. The crowd recognized the crimson glow. Those were the eyes of an Arahan. Eyes that meant certain death if seen directly. Panic erupted, and chaos swept across the arena as terrified spectators fled in every direction. Amidst the storm of fear, only Rio and Zed stood firm inside the arena. But they too had to move. Zed cursed under his breath, urging Rio to run before the guards arrived. Rio panicked, shouting back that he had warned Zed this would happen, that they should have left earlier. Before disappearing, Zed turned toward Herna, shouting that she had better make sure Rio's brother was found. His words burned into her. Herna clenched her teeth in fury, regret gnawing at her. Perhaps she should have listened to the warden from the very beginning. Now anger and frustration boiled over. Rising to her feet, she glared with hatred, vowing to tear Zed Arahan apart.